The rhythmic groan of the moving truck's reverse alarm echoed through the unnervingly quiet streets of Maple Creek Estates, a sound that felt almost profane in its disruption of the suburban tranquility. Sarah Miller stood on the wide, welcoming porch of their newly acquired colonial house, watching the large vehicle maneuver into the driveway. Beside her, her husband, Tom, stretched, the long drive from their previous city apartment still evident in his posture. Their 8-year-old son, Leo, chased a butterfly across the perfectly manicured lawn, his delighted shrieks a stark contrast to the prevailing silence. This house, this neighborhood, represented the culmination of years of saving and planning. Maple Creek Estates, with its tree-lined streets, identical high-end mailboxes, and reputation for safety and tidiness, was supposed to be their haven, a place to raise Leo away from the city's clamor. They knew about the Homeowners Association. Its reputation preceded it, but they dismissed the warnings as typical suburban grumbling. They were reasonable people. They'd follow the rules, keep their property neat. How bad could it really be? They hadn't even opened the truck's cargo door when she arrived. A woman approached with the determined gait of a drill sergeant, her posture ramrod straight, a faux-leather clipboard clutched like a shield. Her blonde hair was sculpted into a severe, unmoving helmet, and her face, framed by sharp cheekbones, seemed fixed in a state of permanent, low-grade disapproval. Her eyes, a pale, scrutinizing blue, swept over the moving truck, their unpacked boxes piled on the lawn, and finally, rested on Sarah and Tom. "Good afternoon," she announced, her voice as crisp and starched as a new banknote. "I am Brenda Johnson, president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee. I trust you received and thoroughly reviewed the covenants, conditions, and restrictions welcome packet." Tom, ever the diplomat, stepped forward, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson, we did. It's comprehensive." He offered a hand. "Tom Miller, this is my wife, Sarah, and our son, Leo." Brenda Johnson ignored the outstretched hand, her gaze briefly flicking towards Leo, who had stopped chasing the butterfly and was now eyeing her warily. "Brenda is sufficient," she corrected, the lack of warmth making the first-name basis feel more like an assertion of dominance than an invitation to familiarity. "My purpose here is simply to ensure a smooth transition and immediate compliance with community standards. Please be advised, moving trucks and associated personnel must vacate the premises no later than 6 p.m. sharp. This is non-negotiable and outlined in Addendum B, Paragraph 7. She then pointed a perfectly manicured, blood-red fingernail towards the portable basketball hoop Tom had just leaned against the garage. "Furthermore, portable recreational equipment, such as that basketball apparatus, is permitted only during periods of active use. When not in use, it must be stored completely out of sight, either within the garage or behind approved backyard fencing. Refer to CC and RS, page 47, subsection C." Sarah felt a prickle of annoyance beneath her forced smile. "Of course, Brenda. We're just starting to unload, but we'll be sure to put it away later. Thanks for the reminder." Brenda offered a minuscule nod, her lips barely moving. "See that you do? Compliance is key to maintaining the aesthetic harmony and property values that define Maple Creek Estates. Any deviations reflect poorly on the entire community." Without another word, she pivoted with military precision and marched back down the driveway, her back radiating an aura of unshakable authority. Tom let out a low whistle as she retreated. "Wow. Okay. She's not messing around. You think?" Sarah sighed, pulling Leo closer. "Someone at work called the HOA president HOA Karen. I have a feeling we just met her second in command, or maybe the real power behind the throne. Let's just keep our heads down, follow the rules," Tom said, trying to sound optimistic. "Paint the door beige, mow the lawn, hide the hoop. We came here for peace and quiet, right? We can handle a strict HOA." For the first few months, they tried. They meticulously followed the thick binder of rules. Lawn cut to regulation height every Thursday. Trash cans retrieved within an hour of pickup. Mailbox kept free of smudges. They even attended a neighborhood barbecue, a stiff affair where conversation seemed guarded, and Brenda Johnson held court near the beverage station, occasionally making pronouncements about upcoming mandatory hedge trimming schedules. They observed how other residents interacted with her, a mixture of forced deference and barely concealed anxiety. Whispers confirmed Sarah's initial assessment. Brenda Johnson, though technically only head of the ARC, wielded immense influence over the entire HOA board and, by extension, the daily lives of everyone in Maple Creek. Her interpretation of the rules was the rule. The Millers managed to avoid direct conflict, earning only one minor email warning when a gust of wind blew over their recycling bin a day before collection. But the undercurrent of surveillance was palpable. Brenda's ubiquitous golf cart seemed to materialize whenever they were outside, her sharp eyes scanning their property. It felt less like a community and more like a beautifully landscaped, low-security prison camp run by a single, overzealous warden. The fragile peace shattered when Sarah revisited her long-dormant passion, pottery. Before Leo was born, before the demands of their careers consumed every spare moment, she had found immense joy and therapeutic release in shaping clay. Now, with Leo in school and her own work allowing for more flexibility, she dreamed of reclaiming that part of herself. Their new house had a spacious, detached two-car garage, perfect, she thought, for a small, personal studio. It wouldn't be a business in the traditional sense. No storefront, no customers visiting. Just her wheel, her clay, and a small, modern electric kiln for firing her creations. Maybe, down the line, she'd sell a few pieces online, but primarily, it was for her own mental well-being. Knowing the HOA's iron grip, Tom and Sarah approached the project with caution. They drafted detailed plans for the garage conversion, adding proper insulation for year-round comfort, installing brighter, energy-efficient LED lighting, running plumbing for a small utility sink, and, crucially, preparing the electrical wiring for the kiln. They emphasized the internal nature of the changes, nothing visible from the street. They included the kiln's manufacturer specifications, highlighting its safety certifications, UL-listed, quiet operation, comparable to a household appliance, and the fact that it required no external venting. They researched the CC and RS again, finding only vague language about nuisances and restrictions on overt commercial activity involving signage or customer traffic, neither of which applied. With a sense of cautious optimism, they submitted the application packet to the Architectural Review Committee via the official HOA portal. The email rejection arrived less than 48 hours later, hitting Sarah's inbox like a digital slap in the face. Subject: Denied. Application #ARC 2025-118. Garage Modification 124 Willow Lane. The email, clearly penned or dictated by Brenda Johnson despite being sent from a generic committee address, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obstructionism. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Miller, following a thorough review by the Architectural Review Committee, your application referenced above, pertaining to proposed modifications to the detached garage structure at 124 Willow Lane, has been denied. The committee finds that the proposed conversion introduces elements inconsistent with the established residential character and standards of Maple Creek Estates. Specifically, potential commercial use. The installation of specialized equipment, kiln, and infrastructure suggests an intent, potential or actual, for home-based manufacturing or commercial enterprise. This potentially contravenes CCNR Article 9, Section 3, prohibiting activities that alter the residential nature of the property. Safety and nuisance concerns. The introduction of high-temperature firing equipment, regardless of certifications, presents inherent risks, fire hazard, electrical load, deemed unacceptable within a dense residential setting. Furthermore, potential associated nuisances, odors, noise, atmospheric particulate matter, even if minimal, cannot be permitted under Article 7, nuisances. Aesthetic impact. While current plans state no external modifications, the potential need for future venting or utility upgrades related to the specialized equipment could negatively impact the visual harmony of the community, violating Article 5, architectural standards. The committee's primary mandate is to preserve the quality of life, safety, and property values for all residents. Approving this application would set an undesirable precedent. This decision is final unless substantially revised plans are submitted eliminating the elements deemed objectionable, specifically, the kiln and any infrastructure suggesting non-residential use. Sincerely, the Maple Creek Estates Architectural Review Committee. Sarah read it twice, her knuckles white on the mouse. Potential? Suggests? Could. She's denying it based on things that might happen or things she's imagining. It's a modern electric kiln, Brenda, not a blast furnace. And what atmospheric particulate matter? Tom leaned over her shoulder, his face grim. She's deliberately misinterpreting everything. Article 9 is clearly aimed at things like running a daycare or a mechanic shop out of your house. And citing Article 5 about potential future venting? That's pure speculation. She just doesn't want it, period. But why? Sarah asked, frustrated. What does she care what I do inside my own garage if it doesn't affect anyone? Control, Tom said flatly. It's always about control with people like her. She needs everyone conforming to her narrow definition of perfect. They requested a face-to-face meeting, clinging to the hope that reasoned discussion might prevail. The meeting took place a week later in the soulless, beige meeting room of the community clubhouse. Brenda sat at the head of the long table, flanked by two other ARC members, a nervous-looking man named Gary, who constantly adjusted his glasses, and a woman, Martha, who seemed determined to study the wood grain of the table. Tom calmly laid out their case again, presenting the kiln specifications, safety data sheets, city electrical code compliance information, and reiterating the purely personal nature of the project. Sarah spoke passionately about her need for a creative outlet, emphasizing how the studio would enhance their enjoyment of their home without impacting neighbors. Brenda listened with an expression of bored impatience, occasionally tapping her pen. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, she began when they finished, her tone condescending. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, the committee's concerns remain. The CC and RS are designed to protect the community from potential issues. Your kiln, regardless of its marketing materials, represents an industrial-type process. Heat, high electrical draw, the possibility of fumes, or operational noise. These are unacceptable risks. But Brenda, Sarah countered, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Many residents work from home using computers, printers, internet routers. That's all electrical equipment. Some likely have sophisticated home offices. That is entirely different, Brenda snapped, her eyes flashing. Standard home office work does not involve processes that generate intense heat or pose the inherent risks associated with firing ceramics. It's apples and oranges. Furthermore, the precedent it would set. What's next? Backyard welding? Small engine repair? We must draw the line firmly to maintain our community's character. Gary mumbled something about electrical load calculations, while Martha continued her intense study of the table. What if we agreed to specific operational hours? Tom suggested, grasping at straws. Or allowed an annual inspection by the HOA? Brenda smiled thinly, a humorless expression. The decision stands. No kiln. No studio suggestive of anything beyond basic storage or parking. Submit revised plans addressing these points, or the matter is closed. Now, if you'll excuse us, the committee has other business. She made a show of looking at her watch. They left the clubhouse feeling defeated and infuriated. It was clear Brenda's opposition wasn't rooted in logic or the actual CC and RS, but in her own arbitrary, rigid interpretation and desire to exert power. Back home, after Leo was asleep, they debated their options. Giving up felt galling. Letting this one tyrannical woman dictate what Sarah could do within the privacy of her own property. Fighting her seemed daunting, potentially expensive, and likely to make their lives even more miserable. Let's do this, Tom said finally, determination hardening his features. We get the electrical work done. We have the city permit. She can't legally stop that. We won't install the kiln yet. Just get the 240-volt outlet ready. It's standard electrical work, nothing more. We'll deal with the rest later. Sarah hesitated, nervous about poking the bear, but the thought of Brenda winning, of surrendering her dream without a fight, felt worse. Okay, she agreed. Let's do it. They hired a licensed, insured electrician. The work was straightforward, running a new line from the breaker box to the garage, installing the heavy-duty outlet. It took only a few hours. The electrician was just packing up his tools, his van parked discreetly in their driveway, when Brenda Johnson's white golf cart whizzed around the corner and screeched to a halt at the end of their drive, blocking the electrician's exit. Brenda emerged, clipboard in hand, face thunderous. What is the meaning of this unauthorized activity? She demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She marched towards the garage, peering inside. You are proceeding with the illegal garage conversion against the explicit denial of the Architectural Review Committee. Brenda, calm down, Tom said, stepping forward, trying to remain composed. This is permitted electrical work. We obtained a permit from the city planning department. Here it is. He held out the official document. Brenda waved it away dismissively. City permits are secondary. HOA approval is paramount for any modification, especially one related to a denied project. This work is clearly intended for the forbidden kiln. We are upgrading the electrical system, which we're entitled to do, Sarah said, stepping beside Tom. We haven't installed anything else. Don't play games with me, Mrs. Miller. Brenda's voice rose, attracting the attention of neighbors mowing lawns or trimming hedges nearby. You are deliberately flouting the rules. I am issuing an immediate cease and desist on all work and levying an initial fine of $500 for commencing unauthorized modifications linked to a denied project. Furthermore, I am documenting this blatant disregard for HOA authority. She began snapping pictures of the new outlet with her phone. You can't fine us for legal, permitted work done inside our own garage. Tom protested, his own voice rising now. I am the president of the ARC, enforcing the CC and RS. Brenda declared, her face flushed. I absolutely can. And be warned, if that kiln appears, the fines will escalate daily. We will place a lien on this property so fast, it'll make your head spin. We will pursue all legal avenues to ensure compliance. The electrician, wide-eyed, mumbled apologies and quickly maneuvered his van around the golf cart, eager to escape the crossfire. Brenda, trembling with righteous fury, scribbled furiously on her clipboard, issued one last glare that promised retribution, and then zipped away in her cart. Shaken and angry, Tom and Sarah retreated inside. The confrontation had been ugly, public, and deeply unsettling. That evening, the official fine notification arrived via email, citing multiple obscure CCNR clauses related to unauthorized work and proceeding with elements of a denied plan. This is insane, Sarah whispered, staring at the $500 demand. She's manufacturing violations. It's harassment, Tom stated grimly. Pure and simple. Time to call Ms. Evans. Their lawyer, Ms. Evans, listened patiently to their account of the confrontation and reviewed the fine notification. Classic Brenda Johnson tactics. From what I hear about Maple Creek, she said wryly. She's banking on you being too intimidated or too budget-conscious to fight back. The fine for the electrical work itself is almost certainly unenforceable, given the city permit. But she's tying it to the denied studio plan, which muddies the waters. And the threat of a lien is serious. HOAs in this state do have significant power to cloud your title and even foreclose, although it's a lengthy process. Ms. Evans agreed that Brenda was overstepping her authority and likely violating provisions of the state's laws governing HOAs regarding reasonable rules and due process. She drafted a sharply worded response to the HOA board, addressed to the board secretary, deliberately bypassing Brenda as ARC chair. The letter contested the fine's validity, asserted their right to perform permitted electrical upgrades, accused the ARC president of harassment and selective enforcement, demanded the fine be rescinded immediately, and reserved their right to seek legal damages if the harassment continued. It also formally requested mediation as outlined in the CC and RS, hoping to force a discussion with the full board, not just Brenda. The HOA's response, which arrived 2 weeks later via their newly retained, expensive-looking law firm, was essentially a middle finger drafted on legal letterhead. It rejected the mediation request, upheld the fine, reiterated the denial of the studio project, and ominously warned that any further steps towards installing the kiln would result in swift and severe legal action, including seeking injunctive relief and foreclosure of the lien placed upon your property for failure to pay duly levied fines. The letter reeked of Brenda's influence, likely fed to the lawyers and the board with her skewed version of events. The lien threat was terrifying. They paid the $500 fine under protest to avoid immediate escalation on that front, but the core issue remained. Brenda hadn't just denied the studio, she had declared war. And the war escalated. Brenda's patrols became more frequent, her scrutiny more intense. A flurry of violation notices followed for trivial matters. Leo's bike left leaning against the garage for an hour after school, $50 fine. A small patch of brown grass near the sidewalk during a hot spell, $100 fine, mandatory sod replacement notice. Their newspaper delivery tube judged slightly crooked, $25 fine. A guest parking on the street slightly beyond the designated 4-hour limit, $75 fine. Each notice cited chapter and verse of the CC and RS, often clauses ignored for other residents. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to drain their finances and break their spirit. Sarah felt constantly watched, anxious every time she stepped outside. Tom grew withdrawn, spending hours poring over the CC and RS and state statutes, looking for loopholes or defenses. The stress permeated their home, shortening tempers and casting a pall over the peaceful life they'd sought. Leo even asked why the angry lady in the cart was always driving by their house. Feeling increasingly isolated, Sarah decided to reach out, cautiously, to other neighbors. She started with casual conversations during walks or at the community pool. At first, people were hesitant, offering non-committal shrugs or quickly changing the subject when Brenda's name came up. But as Sarah persisted, sharing her own experiences in hushed tones, cracks appeared in the facade of neighborhood harmony. She found allies in unexpected places. Mr. Henderson, a retiree whose meticulously tended rose bushes had once earned him a violation for non-native species, confided his own costly run-ins with Brenda. Maria, the single mother down the street, tearfully recounted Brenda's constant complaints about her children's excessive noise during daytime play in their own backyard. The elderly couple, the Abernethys, described the humiliating process of being forced to repaint their house trim after Brenda measured the paint chip with a micrometer and declared it non-compliant, costing them thousands. She thrives on conflict, Mr. Henderson sighed, trimming a perfect rose. Gets the board to approve anything she wants. Hires expensive lawyers with our dues. And the finances? Well, let's just say transparency isn't her strong suit. That comment sparked something. Maria mentioned offhand that her cousin, who ran a small landscaping business, had tried bidding for the Maple Creek contract years ago, but was told the HOA only worked with preferred vendors. The Abernethys recalled exorbitant fees for minor clubhouse repairs performed by the same contractor year after year, a contractor whose truck Brenda's husband seemed to drive occasionally. A new, more dangerous possibility began to form. What if Brenda's crusade wasn't just about control, but also about protecting something else? What if her iron grip on the rules and the board was a cover for financial impropriety? Tom, whose professional background was in corporate finance before he switched to tech, felt a familiar stirring of investigative curiosity mixed with righteous anger. HOAs have to maintain financial records and make them available to homeowners, he told Sarah that night. It's state law? Let's see what preferred vendor really means. The next day, Tom sent a formal, certified letter to the HOA board secretary requesting access to detailed financial records for the past 3 fiscal years, as permitted by state statute. He asked for budgets, actual expenditures itemized by vendor, bank statements, reserve fund reports, and copies of all contracts exceeding $1,000. The initial response was evasive. The board secretary sent back glossy, summarized budget reports that revealed little detail. Tom replied, citing the specific statute again and detailing the penalties for noncompliance. Weeks passed. Finally, under pressure from their own lawyer, likely warning them of legal exposure, the board granted Tom limited access. He was allowed to review the documents, heavily redacted in places, in the HOA office, during limited hours, and without making copies. Undeterred, Tom spent several afternoons hunched over boxes of files in the sterile HOA office, meticulously taking notes, photographing pages with his phone when the board administrative assistant wasn't looking. He cross-referenced invoice numbers, vendor names, payment dates, and contract terms. It was tedious, frustrating work, but patterns quickly emerged that made his blood run cold. Landscaping. The contract, worth nearly $80,000 annually, was consistently awarded without competitive bidding to Prestige Lawn Care, LLC. A quick online search revealed the LLC was registered just 3 years prior, and its registered agent was one Daniel Fletcher, Brenda Johnson's brother-in-law. Invoice amounts often seemed padded compared to industry standards. Repairs and maintenance, a disproportionate amount of work, roof repairs, plumbing, clubhouse upkeep, went to Maple Contracting Services. This company charged significantly higher rates than competitors, yet their invoices, often vague and lacking itemization, were always approved promptly by Brenda or her close allies on the board. Tom remembered the Abernathy's comment about Brenda's husband and the contractor's truck. A search showed Brenda's husband listed as a consultant for Maple Contracting on LinkedIn. Legal fees. The HOA's legal expenses were astronomical, far exceeding norms for a community of its size. Spikes in legal billing coincided precisely with Brenda's documented disputes with residents, the Abernathy's paint fiasco, Maria's nuisance complaints, and now, the Miller studio battle. It appeared HOA funds were being used to finance Brenda's personal crusades via the HOA's law firm. Slush funds, vague budget line items like committee operations, administrative disbursements, and community enhancement projects had ballooned under Brenda's tenure, with minimal supporting documentation for large withdrawals. Checks were often made out to cash or to Brenda herself for reimbursements, with flimsy receipts. It was worse than they imagined. It wasn't just petty tyranny. It looked like systematic embezzlement, self-dealing, and abuse of fiduciary duty, potentially involving hundreds of thousands of dollars of homeowners' money over several years. Brenda wasn't just a Karen. She was potentially a criminal. Armed with this explosive information, Tom and Sarah knew they couldn't act alone. This was bigger than their garage. They arranged another, even more discreet meeting, this time including the Abernathy's, Maria, Mr. Henderson, and Gary, the nervous ARC member who had seemed uncomfortable during their meeting and had quietly expressed reservations about Brenda's handling of their case afterward. Tom laid out his findings, showing them the notes, the company registration details, the suspicious invoices. The mood in the room shifted from nervous resentment to stunned outrage. Gary went pale. I wondered about some of those invoices, he stammered. Brenda always just said they were vetted, standard rates. She controls the check signing with the treasurer, who's her closest friend on the board. She's been using our dues to enrich her family and friends, and to pay lawyers to bully us, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice trembling with anger. They knew they had to force the issue, but directly confronting Brenda felt dangerous. Ms. Evans advised a strategic approach, demand a full, independent forensic audit by a certified external firm. Under most HOA bylaws and state law, members could petition for such an audit if they gathered enough support. Over the next few weeks, the small group worked tirelessly, talking to neighbors one-on-one, sharing Tom's findings carefully, without making accusations they couldn't yet legally prove, and collecting signatures on a formal petition demanding the special meeting. And the audit vote. It was slow, nerve-wracking work. Some residents were still too afraid, others apathetic. But many, hearing the evidence of potential financial misconduct on top of their own frustrations with Brenda's reign, signed on. They eventually gathered signatures from over 30% of the homeowners, more than enough to force the board's hand. When the petition was formally submitted, Brenda reacted predictably, with fury and obfuscation. A blistering email went out to all residents, decrying a malicious campaign by a few disgruntled individuals spreading lies and slander to undermine the dedicated volunteers who worked tirelessly for this community. She claimed the petition was procedurally flawed, that the signatures were coerced. She deployed her allies on the board to try and delay scheduling the meeting. She ramped up petty violation notices against known petition signers. It was a scorched earth defense, but the tide was turning. The sheer number of signatures, combined with the gravity of the implied accusations, made it impossible for the full board, even Brenda's allies, to simply ignore the demand without risking their own legal jeopardy. The special meeting was scheduled. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse buzzed with an unprecedented energy, a mix of anxiety, anger, and grim determination. Nearly every household was represented. Tom and Sarah sat near the front with Ms. Evans, the Abernathy's, Maria, Mr. Henderson, and a visibly sweating Gary. Brenda Johnson stood at the podium, flanked by the HOA's lawyer and her loyal treasurer. She opened the meeting by immediately trying to rule the petition invalid on a series of increasingly arcane procedural grounds. Ms. Evans calmly refuted each point, citing the bylaws and state law. Brenda grew increasingly agitated, her voice sharp, her face flushed. "This entire proceeding is out of order," Brenda declared, banging the small gavel she'd brought. "It is based on unsubstantiated rumors and personal vendettas." Mr. Henderson stood up. "Brenda," he said, his voice clear and steady, "we have the right to ask questions about how our money is being spent. We have the right to transparency. For years, many of us have felt intimidated and ignored. Tonight, we want answers." One by one, other residents stood, emboldened. Maria spoke about the constant harassment. Mr. Abernathy detailed the paint fiasco and the questionable repair bills. Others shared their own stories of fines, threats, and Brenda's dismissive attitude. Then, Tom took the floor. He didn't make direct accusations of crime, but he calmly and methodically presented the evidence he had gathered: the pattern of no-bid contracts to connected parties, the exorbitant legal fees corresponding to personal disputes, the lack of documentation for huge sums of money. He concluded by formally moving to commission an independent forensic audit, naming a reputable local accounting firm. Brenda tried to interject, to object, to rule him out of order, but the sentiment in the room was overwhelmingly against her. Residents shouted for a vote. The HOA lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently to Brenda and the other board members. Their faces showed dawning panic. They knew refusing the audit now would look like an admission of guilt. The motion was seconded. Brenda, realizing she'd lost control, tried one last tactic. "An audit will cost tens of thousands of dollars," she exclaimed. "Money that could be spent on community improvements. Is that what you want? To waste money on this fishing expedition? We want to know if more of our money has already been wasted or stolen," someone shouted back, followed by a chorus of agreement. The vote was called. It wasn't even close. A sea of hands went up in favor of the audit. Brenda stared out at the room, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her reign was crumbling. She grabbed her notes, muttered something about contacting my personal attorney, and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. The forensic audit, conducted by a respected independent firm with no ties to the community, was thorough and ruthless. Auditors spent weeks poring over bank statements, contracts, invoices, emails obtained under subpoena, and interviewing current and former board members, vendors, and Brenda herself, who attended with her newly hired criminal defense lawyer and mostly pleaded the fifth. The final audit report, presented to the HOA board and subsequently released to the homeowners, was a bombshell. It confirmed Tom's findings and uncovered even more. Systematic overbilling by Prestige Lawn Care, Brenda's brother-in-law, totaling over $150,000 over 5 years, with Brenda explicitly approving inflated invoices. Evidence of kickbacks from Maple Contracting Services, employing Brenda's husband, paid directly into a secret bank account held by Brenda and her husband, totaling nearly $90,000. Misappropriation of over $50,000 from HOA reserve funds, disguised through falsified invoices for emergency repairs that never occurred or consulting services never rendered. Use of the HOA credit card by Brenda for personal expenses, including vacations, expensive meals, clothing, and spa treatments, totaling over $30,000, falsely coded as board development or committee supplies. Proof that Brenda had directed the HOA's law firm to pursue aggressive and costly legal action against residents like the Millers primarily out of personal animosity, misleading the board about the merits and costs. The total quantifiable fraud and embezzlement exceeded $320,000. The HOA board, now under new interim leadership, Gary, surprisingly finding his courage, had stepped up, immediately turned the audit report over to the county district attorney's office and the local police department. They also filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Brenda Johnson, her husband, her brother-in-law, and their respective companies to recover the stolen funds and punitive damages. The wheels of justice turned swiftly. Faced with the damning audit and corroborating evidence uncovered by detectives, bank records, emails, vendor testimony, the district attorney convened a grand jury. Indictments came down quickly. Brenda Johnson was arrested at her home, not by HOA complaint, but by uniformed police officers. The sight of the Queen of Maple Creek being led away in handcuffs was captured by a neighbor's phone and quickly spread through the community's informal networks. She was charged with multiple felonies: grand larceny, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her husband faced related conspiracy and fraud charges. Her brother-in-law faced charges related to the landscaping contract fraud. The news exploded. Local papers and even regional news channels picked up the story. Suburban HOA president accused of massive embezzlement scheme. Maple Creek Estates, once known only for its pristine lawns, was now infamous. Brenda's arrogance finally shattered, replaced by fear. Her expensive criminal defense attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but given the amount of money stolen and the brazen abuse of trust, the DA insisted on significant prison time. The civil suit resulted in liens being placed on all their known assets, including the large colonial house in Maple Creek. Their bank accounts were frozen. The trial was a spectacle. Witness after witness, former board members, disgruntled vendors, the independent auditors, even her brother-in-law, who took a plea deal for reduced charges in exchange for testimony, laid bare the intricate web of deceit Brenda had woven. Tom Miller's meticulous notes from his initial investigation formed a key part of the prosecution's narrative. Brenda's defense tried to portray her as a naive volunteer overwhelmed by complex finances, or alternatively, as the victim of a conspiracy by ungrateful residents. But the evidence was simply too strong. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all major counts. At the sentencing hearing, several residents, including the Abernathy's and Sarah Miller, provided victim impact statements, describing not just the financial loss, but the emotional toll of living under Brenda's oppressive regime. The judge, citing the calculated, long-term nature of the fraud and the profound betrayal of her community's trust, showed little leniency. Brenda Johnson, stripped of her power, her reputation, and her carefully curated image, was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Her husband received 3 years probation and was ordered to pay substantial restitution alongside Brenda. Her brother-in-law also received probation and fines. The civil judgment against Brenda and her husband was enormous. To begin satisfying it, the court ordered the forfeiture and sale of their assets. The Maple Creek house, the symbol of the very status and conformity Brenda had weaponized, was seized. An auction sign went up on the perfect lawn she had lorded over for so long. Other assets, cars, investment accounts, were liquidated to repay the HOA and cover legal fees and fines. The Queen of Maple Creek lost everything: her freedom, her home, her fortune, and any shred of respect she might have once commanded. In the aftermath, Maple Creek Estates began the slow process of healing and reform. A new HOA board was elected, committed to transparency and fairness. Strict financial controls, including mandatory external audits and rotating check-signing authority, were implemented. The CC and RS were reviewed and revised to remove ambiguity and ensure rules were applied reasonably and equitably. The Architectural Review Committee was restructured with clear, objective standards and an appeals process that didn't rely on the whim of a single individual. Tom and Sarah Miller finally finished their garage studio. Sarah installed her wheel and her small, quiet kiln. The first time she fired a batch of mugs, the gentle hum of the kiln felt like a victory song. Light streamed into the space, illuminating shelves of her creations. It was exactly as she had dreamed, a peaceful sanctuary, hard-won. Life in Maple Creek gradually found a new normal, one less focused on rigid conformity and more on genuine community. Neighbors talked more openly, scarred by the shared experience, but also bonded by it. The reign of HOA Karen served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how easily power could corrupt, but also how determined residents, working together, could ultimately reclaim their community from tyranny. The quiet hum from Sarah's studio was no longer a point of contention, but a quiet symbol of the peace they had fought so hard to achieve.